You and I are polar opposites is pretty freaking weird.
My sweaty hand.
But I also think that it's the kind of romance anime that we need to be seeing more of. Why, you might ask? Well, the main reason is because the love interests get together on the first episode. How many romance anime can you say that for? Oh. Well, the majority of romance anime still treat the confession as the ending, which is a little strange when you think about it, because the confession isn't the conclusion of a relationship, it's literally the moment where the relationship becomes possible. Suzuki and Tani already know that they both like each other, so why spend 12 plus episodes just delaying the inevitable and filling it with random misunderstandings and cock-blocking childhood friends? They get into a relationship and have absolutely no idea what they're doing. It's the central joke of the series, but it's also the reason the romance works so well. The tension is created from watching two people who are aware of their feelings try to navigate the consequences. But other than that, the obvious explanation for why this series works is right there in the title: polar opposites. Suzuki is loud, energetic, socially confident, and seemingly incapable of allowing a thought to exist inside her head without immediately sharing it with everybody in the room. Tani, on the other hand, is quiet, reserved, difficult to read, and speaks with the careful economy of a man who's being charged per syllable. Now, this might seem like a familiar pairing: the energetic girl and the quiet boy, the extrovert and the introvert. You could build an entire romance anime around that contrast, and plenty of anime already have. However, a surface level contrast isn't a relationship, it's just a character description. The important thing isn't that Suzuki talks a lot and Tani doesn't, but how the show makes those traits affect the way they understand each other. Suzuki doesn't just want Tani to listen because she likes hearing herself talk. She's constantly aware that she might be overwhelming him. She talks, then worries that she talked too much. She tries to keep that energy up, then wonders whether the energy is becoming a performance. But Tani isn't quiet because the show is withholding his personality from us. That's just genuinely how he processes the world. He takes time to respond. He notices more than he says, and his affection is often expressed through small decisions rather than dramatic speeches. The show could have treated him as the standard, emotionless, nonchalant male lead, but it doesn't. Tani isn't treated as a wall that Suzuki has to break through. He's a person whose emotional language is simply different from hers, and that distinction matters because the worst version of the opposites attract trope isn't actually about two different people falling in love. It's about one character being rewarded for gradually forcing the other character to become more like them. The loud character makes the quiet character more outgoing. The quiet character makes the loud character more mature. Everybody moves towards the middle, and by the end of the show, they're conveniently compatible because the script has sanded away the inconvenient parts. But You and I Are Polar Opposites is more interested in something less tidy. Suzuki and Tani don't become the same person, they just become better at interpreting each other, and that's a much more convincing form of romantic development. One of the most impressive things about Suzuki and Tani is that their problems usually don't exist because the plot has temporarily removed their ability to communicate, but they struggle because communication itself is difficult, and there's a big difference. The first version is frustrating because the audience can see the solution sitting right in front of the characters. You know how you just want to start yelling at the screen like, do this or just say that. But the second version is compelling because the characters are doing their best, and their best is still messy. Suzuki talks too much because she's trying to make sure the conversation doesn't die. Tani says too little because he's trying to make sure he doesn't say the wrong thing. Both of them are trying to close the distance between who they are and how they think the other person sees them. And that's the show's real interpretation of the title. They aren't opposites because one likes white and the other likes black. They're opposites in the way they protect themselves. Suzuki fills silence. Tani creates silence. Suzuki tries to make her feelings visible. Tani often keeps his feelings private until he's certain they need to be spoken. But neither method is inherently better. Suzuki can interpret Tani's quietness as disinterest, and Tani can interpret Suzuki's social energy as evidence that he's less important to her than the people around her. And this is where the show becomes more emotionally intelligent than it initially appears. It doesn't treat these insecurities as proof that the relationship is toxic. It treats them as feelings that need to be understood and worked through. A lot of romance stories only know how to depict jealousy in two ways. Either jealousy is played as a cute proof of love, or it's treated as evidence that the character is secretly terrible. Polar Opposites gives jealousy a more ordinary and uncomfortable role. It's an emotion that can appear even when nobody has done anything wrong. Tani can feel insecure about Suzuki spending time with other people without Suzuki being disloyal. Suzuki can worry that she's overwhelming Tani without Tani secretly wanting her to disappear. The feeling is real, but the conclusion the character draws from that feeling may not be. And that's where growth happens. The characters aren't learning that they should never feel insecure. They're learning that insecurity isn't always a reliable narrator. And honestly, that's a way more useful lesson than most romantic anime deliver. The show also allows Tani to take initiative. He's reserved, but he's not passive per se. He expresses affection in his own way. He He becomes jealous, he makes decisions, he tries to improve rather than simply wait for Suzuki to drag every emotion out of him, which is why his quietness works. The show doesn't confuse silence with depth, but it also doesn't confuse loudness with shallowness. Both characters have inner lives, they simply reveal them at different speeds. Sometimes the fastest way to make a relationship feel real is to show what the couple is like when they aren't alone together. Suzuki and Tani don't exist in a romantic vacuum. Their friends react to them, they tease them, they misunderstand them, they give advice, and they occasionally make their problems worse because friends are still human beings and not a free emotional support service with perfect narrative timing. The group also gives the characters a social context. We see the couple as individuals, but we also see how their relationship changes the atmosphere around them, which is important because romance isn't only about the private moments. It changes the way people behave in public. It changes what friends notice, it changes what becomes embarrassing, and it changes the social meaning of a completely ordinary interaction. A hand gesture that wouldn't mean anything from a stranger can become an important event when it comes from the person you like. The friend group allows the show to explore that without making everything a dramatic declaration. It also prevents the story from implying that romance is the only meaningful relationship in a teenager's life. Watanabe and Honda aren't just pieces on the board waiting to be paired off. Their presence helps create a world where friendship has value even when it doesn't lead to romance. A lot of romance anime unintentionally make friendship feel like a consolation prize. The characters who aren't dating anybody are framed as incomplete. Every conversation becomes evidence that two people are secretly in love. Every friendship is treated as a failed romance waiting to be corrected. Polar Opposites is more generous than that. It allows people to be close without demanding that the closeness become romantic, and because of that, the romantic relationships feel more meaningful when they do develop. The show isn't saying that romance is the only way to become important to another person. Romance is just one kind of relationship among many. That sounds obvious, but anime has been trying to prove otherwise for decades. The friend group also gives the series a useful tonal range. Suzuki and Tani can have a cute moment, then the story can move to Yamada and Nishi, then Azuma and Taira can introduce something more uncomfortable or emotionally serious. The story doesn't have to stretch one couple's conflict across an entire season because it has multiple relationships operating at different speeds. One couple is already dating, one is slowly becoming closer, another is still trying to understand why they're so defensive around each other. This creates a variety without abandoning the central theme. Every relationship becomes another answer to the same question. How do two people deal with the fact that the other person is not an extension of themselves? The most dangerous thing a romance anime can do with its side couples is make them feel like alternate versions of the main couple. The main pair is a loud girl and quiet boy, so the side pair becomes a quiet girl and a loud boy. Then another pair is a cynical girl and emotionally damaged boy, and another pair is childhood friends who are secretly in love. Eventually, the show has assembled a full periodic table of romantic dynamics. Polar Opposites avoids making its relationships feel interchangeable because the characters don't all want the same thing. Nishi and Yamada aren't simply another opposites attract pairing. Their dynamic is shaped by Nishi's difficulty entering social spaces and Yamada's desire to make her feel included without turning her into a project. There's a very uncomfortable version of the shy girl story where the outgoing boy treats the shy character like a personal challenge. He wants to unlock her, so to speak. He wants to be the special person who makes her talk, and that can quickly turn a person into a trophy. Yamada is more compelling when his interest in Nishi comes from paying attention to what makes her laugh and what makes her comfortable rather than treating her social anxiety as an obstacle in his personal hero story. The difference is small, but it's the difference between social affection and conquest. Azuma and Taira operate in a different emotional register entirely. They're not as immediately cute, they're more guarded. Their chemistry is built from friction, self-protection, and the ways people can become attached while pretending they aren't. Azuma's low self-esteem is especially interesting because it doesn't arrive packaged in the most familiar visual form. Anime often depicts insecurity through the shy, isolated character who's obviously struggling to fit in, but Azuma is a bit more complicated than that. A person can be popular, attractive, funny, or socially capable and still allow other people to treat them badly. Confidence isn't a permanent shield. Social status doesn't automatically produce self-respect. Taira is often more focused on his own jealousy and social position than the people around him are. This is another subtle idea that the show handles well. Sometimes you are the only person who thinks everybody is judging you. That doesn't mean the anxiety feels fake. It means the anxiety has become larger inside your head than it is in the room. The show uses these characters to explore different forms of insecurity. Suzuki worries that her energy is too much, and Tanya worries that his quietness isn't enough. Nishi worries that she can't participate. Taira worries about how he is perceived. Azuma learned to tolerate treatment she should reject. These aren't identical problems, and the show doesn't solve them with identical solutions. Instead, the characters affect each other through ordinary interaction. Somebody makes another person laugh. Somebody notices that a friend is uncomfortable. Somebody takes initiative. Somebody admits they were wrong. The emotional development isn't always announced, but it's instead accumulated slowly. And this is where the series' simplicity becomes a strength. It doesn't need every character to have a grand, tragic backstory. It only needs them to have a reason for behaving the way they do. And a character doesn't need to be secretly traumatized in order to be awkward. Sometimes they're awkward because they're 16, and that's perfectly fine. A show doesn't need every emotional beat to explode into a dramatic season finale. More often than not, real growth is just a conversation that ends a little better than the last one. It's someone choosing to explain themselves instead of withdrawing, letting a partner hang out with friends without viewing it as a threat, or realizing that an insecurity isn't actual evidence. That's where the show's visual style and tone really shine. Beneath its bright, energetic premise lies a story built on remarkably quiet moments, a brief glance, a beat of hesitation, a character standing just a bit closer than before, or an inside joke that wouldn't have worked earlier in their relationship. It's easy to overlook these subtle shifts because they don't explicitly announce themselves as character development, but intimacy is almost entirely made of details. While grand declarations are memorable precisely because they're rare, true closeness grows out of everyday repetition. You remember what someone likes, you learn how they act when they're nervous, and you start to figure out when silence means comfort versus when something's actually wrong. Great romance isn't just a moment someone finally says I love you, it's the steady accumulation of proof that they've been paying attention all along. Polar Opposites excels at delivering that exact kind of proof. Suzuki and Tani are constantly learning the true shape of one another. Suzuki realizes that Tani's quiet nature doesn't mean he's uninterested, while Tani learns that Suzuki's high energy isn't a sign of emotional carelessness. Even their friend group gradually adapts, as the audience discovers that every relationship in the circle speaks in its own distinct language. That's why the narrative feels so deeply satisfying, even when the physical stakes couldn't be lower. The question isn't whether the characters are going to survive some grand trial, it's simply whether they'll understand each other a little better by the time the credits roll. And in a romance story, that's more than enough. Now I want to be careful here because other romance anime is a massive category and I don't want to pretend that every series makes the exact same mistakes. Plenty of romance anime are beautifully written, however, there are a few recurring habits that Polar Opposites consciously avoids. The first is treating the confession as the only meaningful form of progress. If a story only moves forward while characters are inching towards a confession, it usually has no idea what to do with them once they actually get together. The second is using basic misunderstandings as a substitute for a personality. When two characters constantly fail to communicate just because the plot needs them to be apart, their relationship turns into a machine that exists solely to generate delays. Third, side characters are often reduced to obstacles or prizes. A friend becomes a rival, an ex becomes a threat, and every dynamic is forced through the exact same romantic funnel. And lastly, stories frequently mistake an archetype for a real person. Assuming the loud girl is naturally confident, the quiet boy is inherently deep, the shy girl is completely innocent, or the jealous boy is just deeply in love. Polar Opposites starts with recognizable archetypes, but it gives them enough internal contradiction to make them feel like real people. The show isn't great because it avoids familiar tropes entirely. It still relies on opposites attracting, awkward dates, jealousy, side couples, and tight-knit friend groups. What it avoids is the lazy execution of those tropes. The problem isn't about the trope itself, but what the writing allows the trope to do. A quiet character can be quiet without feeling empty. A jealous character can be insecure without turning possessive. A couple can get together early without running out of a story, and a relationship can be healthy without becoming boring. That last point is probably the most important. So many stories assume that dramatic conflicts require someone to be manipulative, dishonest, or emotionally unavailable. Polar Opposites understands that two genuinely decent people can still run into real problems. They can hurt each other by accident, misread a situation, become defensive, or say the wrong thing. The difference is that the show lets them tackle those problems like people who actually want their relationship to work. To wrap things up, You and I Are Polar Opposites isn't a perfect romance anime. It can get repetitive. Some side relationships are naturally more compelling than others, and the tone occasionally leans so hard into sweetness that you might need to brush your teeth afterwards. But the show understands something a lot of romance anime forget, which is that romance isn't the moment two people stop being separate individuals, but the ongoing process of staying separate individuals while learning how to make room for each other. That's the real reason this series feels so satisfying to watch. Its romance isn't built on the fantasy that love erases insecurity, but on the belief that insecurity can be admitted, examined, and survived. Its comedy isn't rooted in the trope that characters are too oblivious to understand their own feelings, but in the reality that people can understand their feelings perfectly and still act like complete disasters. The friend group isn't just there to pad out the runtime. It shows that romance exists alongside friendship, embarrassment, shared history, and jealousy, proving a person's life is bigger than just one couple. Meanwhile, the side characters aren't alternate routes in a dating simulator. They're distinct individuals dealing with their own emotional baggage. That's why the show's simplicity works. It doesn't need to invent a brand new definition of romance. It simply pays attention to the milestones other stories rush through, like the confession, the awkward first date, the initial misunderstanding after making things official, and the quiet realization that liking someone is easy compared to actually understanding them. While most romance anime ask, will these two get together? You and I Are Polar Opposites asks, now that they're together, can they actually learn how to be together? That's what a great romance anime looks like in my opinion. It's not because it lacks conflict, or because the characters are pristine models of emotional health, or because every episode is a flawless masterpiece you have to defend like sacred text. It works because the characters actually feel like people. Messy, funny, insecure, and occasionally irrational human beings who are genuinely trying to care for each other without completely losing their minds, which honestly might be the most unrealistic part of the whole show.